When driving the Hypercar class in Le Mans Ultimate, you'll often find yourself sharing the track with other classes in what's called multi-class racing. But what are your responsibilities when sharing the track with these other slower classes, and what kind of mindset should you use when trying to pass them? Well, today we'll tell you everything you need to know. So first, let's cover the basic racing rule when it comes to overtaking another car, which is that unless you are alongside the other car before entering the corner, then you are not entitled to any space during that corner. It's very common to see hypercars making late moves like this up the inside of a corner, and more often than not, there's never an issue. But what you need to realize here is that in these situations, you are technically taking a risk with your overtake attempt, and any collision with the other car would always be deemed as your fault. Remember that as the faster car, it's always your responsibility to pass the slower car safely no matter the situation. But of course, racing is a fluid, ever-changing environment where no two situations are ever the same. So what steps can we take to make the right decision when trying to overtake a slower car? Well, we can do this using a process called the 3 C's, which stand for communication, caution, and commitment. Now, using these 3 steps in that exact order is important, and we'll cover them all starting with communication. So obviously it's not possible for us to communicate with the driver in front of us via voice, so we need to look for another method. And we do this by positioning our car on the track in a manner that gives the car in front a good idea of what we're planning to do in the upcoming corner. Now there's 2 possible messages that we can send to the driver, and in our first example, let's see how we can tell the car in front that we intend to pass them in the next corner. Now we're headed to the first Mulsanne chicane here at Le Mans, and we have a GTE car in front of us. I'm looking to pass them into the entry of the first corner. To start off, once we're close enough, we use our high beams to flash at them in order to get their attention. Now shortly after that, we then move onto the inside line. This is to help them understand that we intend to make a move on them coming into the corner. It's really important that you do this as early as possible because doing it last second can confuse the other driver, and that's the easiest way to end up in a collision. Now once we reach the braking point for the corner, you can see that our car is alongside theirs. And according to racing rules, this means that we're entitled to space when entering the corner. You can also see that once we start braking, we make sure that we leave about half a car's width between our car and theirs to minimize the chances of any contact occurring. Now in our next example, we'll be telling the driver in front that we don't want to overtake them. We're in the Alpine and trailing behind this LMP2. Now this next corner that we're about to reach has a really tight line, and trying to go through it too wide can often result in a collision. We need to let this driver know that we don't intend to overtake them at the next corner, and we do this by positioning our car directly behind theirs as we approach the corner. This tells the driver in front that we do not intend to attempt an overtake, and that we instead want to follow them through it and then overtake them after the corner is completed. Remember that the easiest and safest place to overtake a slower car is when traveling in a straight line. So in this case, it's better to lift slightly and stay behind them, and then prioritize a good exit coming out of this tight corner. It's important to remember that the key to surviving a multi-class race always starts with good communication. The easier you make it for the driver in front to understand what you intend to do, the easier it is for them to work together with you to make it out of a corner without any incidents. Now moving on to caution, and this one's fairly straightforward. Since these hypercars are the fastest class on the track, it also means they're capable of causing the most damage due to the difference in speed compared to the slower classes. Now it's very common for this speed difference to not work in your favor, and that's where you need to show caution in order to minimize the chance of getting into an incident with the slower car. In this example at Spa, you can see we're chasing down this Lamborghini and we approach the Eau Rouge Raidillon section. Now the Lamborghini's gotten lucky here and managed to pass the yellow Ferrari in front of us before entering the corner. We, on the other hand, are now stuck behind them, and you can see that since we aren't alongside them when entering the corner, we aren't entitled to any space. So now we have no choice but to use caution and lift off the throttle to follow the Ferrari all the way up Eau Rouge and Raidillon since the corners are so tight. Then as we exit the corner, we see that the Ferrari is starting to drift over to the right towards us, getting dangerously close. Remember, we always, if possible, want to try and keep about half a car's width of distance between us and the other driver. So we react to this again by showing caution by drifting further over to the right hand side in order to maintain that half car distance, even if it means going slightly off track. As you've seen here, dealing with slower car traffic can at times be extremely frustrating, but it's important to remember that it's an element of multi-class racing that you have no control over. Sometimes it'll work in your favor and sometimes it'll work against you. What's important is that you always show caution when dealing with slower class cars, because at the end of the day, they have just as much right to be on that track as you. And if you do end up in an incident with them, then it more than likely would have been your fault. Remember that it's better to be patient and potentially lose a position rather than take a pointless risk and ruin your entire race. Now finally, let's talk about commitment. But what exactly does that word have to do with racing? Imagine that you're standing in the middle of a road with a footpath on either side of it. Now a car approaches you and it's heading straight towards you. So which side of the road do you move to? Now if you decided to move either to the left or the right side of the road, then you'd be fine, as long as you made that decision quickly. But if you sat there second guessing yourself and trying to figure out which side would be better, then you'd take too long to make a decision and the car would make contact with you. And this is the lesson. Whenever you're trying to make a move on any car, whether it's a slower class or the same one as you, it's important that you perform the move with full commitment in order to reduce the risk of confusing the other driver. Showing hesitation or second guessing yourself when you're about to make a move costs you precious milliseconds that in turn increases the risk of getting into a collision with the other car. The longer that you take to make a decision, the less chance that you have of the move succeeding. Now back in our Alpine, you can see that we're chasing the Lamborghini, but we also have a Toyota right behind us. We're following this Aston Martin GTE, and as we approach the Brusol's hairpin, you can see that the Lamborghini yet again gets lucky and manages to pass the GTE before the braking zone, which is this red billboard here. Now as we reach the braking zone, you can see that we still aren't alongside the Aston Martin, which means that technically we are not entitled to any space when entering the corner. However, we are still fairly close to being alongside it, and we've already positioned our car on the inside line, which communicates to the driver that we intend to make a move. We decide to commit fully to the move and go hard on the brakes at the braking point, and you can see that thanks to our clear communication and our full commitment to the move, the GT understands what we intend to do. Using the information we've given them, they then brake earlier as well as delay their turn in order to help us pass safely. Now if we hesitated last second and decided to brake earlier, we would have ended up alongside the GTE as they turned in for the corner, and the possibility of a collision would have been high. Alternatively, if we had decided to back out and try to move to the left and position ourselves behind the GTE, it would have been too late for that, and we probably would have ended up in a collision with either them or the Toyota behind us. Remember, it's important that once you've communicated what you intend to do before reaching a corner, that you then follow through with that decision in order to ensure that you don't confuse the driver in front of you. You might sometimes have to back out of a move due to some kind of emergency, like a car spinning out in front of you, but those are extreme conditions that are out of your control, and all you can do in those situations is just do your best to avoid a collision. So now that we've covered the 3 C's and how to perform them, let's look at the consequences of not applying this process. In this first example at Fuji, we see a Ferrari approaching a GTE. Now this corner they're approaching is a fast left-hander which has a very tight line, and is really dangerous to try and go too wide through. First we see that the Ferrari communicates by positioning their car behind the GTE that they intend to follow them through the corner, and this is the sensible thing to do. The Ferrari is nowhere near being alongside the GTE before reaching the braking point, and at this stage the GTE driver would just assume that the Ferrari intends to follow them. However, at the last second, the Ferrari driver then changes their mind and decides to try and make an overtake, but it's way too late to do this as the gap is too large, resulting in a collision with the GTE driver. In this scenario, the Ferrari driver initially showed good communication by positioning their car behind the GTE, but then failed to commit to that decision and decided to try and make a move last second, which was never going to work due to the large gap between the two cars. In this next example in the Isota, you can see that we've just overtaken a BMW, and as we approach this next corner, we have a Porsche GTE in front of us. Now we're nowhere near alongside the Porsche, and it's about to reach the braking point, which is the 50-meter board here. We then stay on the throttle too long and then try to stick our nose into the apex here, which then leads to contact with the GTE. Now our first mistake here was not showing caution and braking too late. We then greedily started to come off the brakes to try and get closer alongside the GTE before the corner apex. This results in the contact, which is completely our fault in this case. Now for our final example, we see a BMW following an LMP2 in the rain here at Spa. Now time and again we see the BMW communicate that they intend to overtake by positioning their car on the inside line. The problem here however is that the driver is nowhere near being alongside the LMP2, so the move is never a viable one, especially in the rain where you often need to brake much earlier. After 3 corners of this behaviour and no successful overtake, the LMP2 driver becomes frustrated with the BMW driver's communication and decides to start defending. This is the LMP2 driver's way of telling them that they want him to stop this behaviour, because they clearly aren't fast enough in the rain to make an overtake mid-corner. Although by doing this they aren't following multi-class rules, as they're taking a defensive line against a faster class car. This breakdown in communication then leads to the LMP2 defending at the fast Blanchimont corner, which almost results in a collision, as well as the BMW driver taking a dangerous line around the outside, which could easily have resulted in a loss of control. Now in this situation, both drivers made some poor decisions. From the Hypercar driver's point of view, however, after the first failed overtake attempt, they should have realised that the LMP2 was faster in the wet and instead followed them and used caution to wait for an easier overtaking opportunity like the CAMMUS Straight, where they could use their car's superior top speed to perform an easy overtake. Remember that in multi-class racing, a slower class car is never obligated to lift off the throttle or yield to you just because you're in a faster class. All they're required to do is stay at their own pace on the racing line and not take any kind of defensive line against you. It's then your job as the faster car to make the overtake safely, and this is a great example where the faster class might not always be the fastest when the weather conditions aren't optimal. So that covers the basics of how to behave in multi-class racing, and it also marks the end of our Hypercar beginner series. Now if you've been following this series from episode 1, then you should now have all the tools you need to improve and become a competent hypercar driver. Just remember that like anything in life, the more you practice, the better you'll become at driving these cars. So take these lessons, keep practicing, and you'll be winning races in no time. Now if you have any questions about what we covered here or about Le Mans Ultimate in general, then feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.